I rise in strong support of H.R. 802 as amended, the Maritime Pollution Prevention Act of 2008. The gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Cummings, and I introduced this legislation at the outset of the 110th Congress to provide the Coast Guard and the Environmental Protection Agency with the legal authority they need to implement Annex 6 of the International Convention for Prevention of Pollution from Ships. The House passed H.R. 802 on March 26, 2007, by a vote of 359 to 48. Notwithstanding that overwhelming vote of approval, the bill languished in the place we affectionately call the other body for more than a year. But recently, they have passed with minor changes that legislation. With House passage today, the bill can go to the President for consideration and for his signature. Global warming is a critical issue, not just for the United States, but for every nation, for every person on the planet. The international maritime community has recognized their contribution to global warming and to ocean pollution and have developed an international convention to address air pollutants from diesel ships. For many years, the International Maritime Organization of the United Nations has been developing international standards to prevent pollution from ships that traverse the oceans. Those standards are now embodied in the International Convention for the Prevention of Pollution from Ships of 1973. The U.S. has implemented these environmental laws by enacting and amending the legislation known as the Act to Prevent Pollution from Ships. And when I served on the Merchant Marine and Fisheries Committee, much of whose jurisdiction has now been absorbed by the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure, we worked on early versions of that, of those amendments and environmental laws to implement and amend the APPS. Annex 6 of the Convention for Prevention of Pollution from Ships limits the discharge of nitrogen oxides from large marine diesel engines. It governs the sulfur content of marine diesel fuel, prohibits the emission of ozone-depleting substances. It regulates the emission of volatile organic compounds and the transfer of cargoes between tankers and terminals. It sets standards for shipboard incinerators and fuel oil quality, and it established requirements for platforms and drill rigs at sea. The Senate ratified this treaty by unanimous consent in April 2006. But it doesn't go into effect until we enact implementing legislation. And the bill we consider today will implement Annex 6 of the Convention. It'll provide the Coast Guard and the Environmental Protection Agency the authority necessary to develop U.S. standards and to enforce those standards on the thousands of U.S. and foreign flag vessels that enter U.S. waters. Recognizing the challenge that the world faces in combating worldwide climate change and global warming, we have to take every measure possible to contain and then reduce rising temperatures on this planet, and particularly the oceans that are deep reservoirs of oxygen, but also reservoirs of carbon and of the acid that we're pouring into the atmosphere. And that combination of absorbing heat, acid, and carbon is having deleterious effects on the world's coral reefs. There was a very enlightening program on this devastation of the coral reefs on the Science Channel just the other evening. It's something that I witnessed myself when I lived in Haiti and did snorkeling and exploring of the coral reefs. So you could see those. This was in the 1950s. You could see the dead reefs on the one side and the vibrant growing coral reefs and the abundance of life on those coral reefs filtering out deleterious elements in the ocean water. But on the other side, the dead reef, and a testament to the effects of pollution in our waters, and that was 50 years ago. So the Senate amendments do not affect the application of MARPOL 6 to the thousands of vessels that enter our ports. Their amendment clarifies that the United States can enforce MARPOL 6 on vessels that are registered in countries which are not party to the convention when those vessels are in our 200-mile exclusive economic zone, if the Coast Guard is on board the vessel to enforce other annexes to the convention, and to the extent that this enforcement does not violate international law. In addition, the Senate amendment clarifies that an individual, a person, may bring a civil action if the administrator of EPA has failed to perform any act or duty not discretionary under the Act. And that's similar to civil action that may be brought under other provisions of law and other application of other annexes to the convention. The delay by the Senate, I regret, may have near-term unfortunate consequences for the United States in the IMO negotiations that will take place this coming October to reduce emissions from ships. Under the terms of the convention, only parties to the convention may vote on those reduction measures. And a nation is not party to the convention until 90 days after its instruments of ratification have been deposited with the IMO. The Senate delay means we may not meet that deadline, and the U.S. may not be able to vote to improve increased standards, even though delegates representing the United States chaired the working group that met over many sessions to negotiate these new, more rigorous standards. So given the importance of completing action on this legislation, I asked our Majority Leader, Mr. Hoyer, to schedule this bill as quickly as possible immediately upon the House return to session today. And I thank the Majority Leader for his consideration. I'm hopeful we get the bill to the President's desk without delay. I'd also like to take the opportunity to thank our Chairman of the Subcommittee on Coast Guard and Maritime Transportation, Mr. Cummings, who's devoted a great deal of energy to the work of the subcommittee and to this particular issue in developing this legislation. And to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Micah, the ranking member of our committee, for his cooperation and support in moving the bill last year and expediting today's action considering the bill, and to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. LaTourette, ever the thoughtful, considerate, and legal expert of the committee, and I am grateful for his contribution. I reserve the balance of my time.